Hi, welcome back to the workshop for what will be the last episode in the P-base build. Last time we polished up the paint on the body and we got the electrics sorted out, and this time I'm going to carry on working on the neck before we tackle the final assembly. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do on this neck is to polish up the fretboard. So all the little spaces between the frets, we'll get those sanded down and polished up. Once that's done, we can then set about removing the lacquer off the frets. I'm going to leave the lacquer on as long as possible so that the sanding doesn't kind of damage the finish that we've put on the frets so lovingly a few episodes ago. So to do this, I'm just going to take a nice bowl of warm, clean soapy water. I'm going to start off with a bit of 800 grit, very delicately. Just rub that down. Shouldn't have to do a lot. And then I'm going to go to some 1200 and just carry on until all the orange peel is out of there. Have to be really careful around the edges because it will burn through very quickly, and this lacquer is still quite soft. It's only been on about 4 days. Okay, so that's rubbed down, and I'm just going to polish it up with some teacup. I'm not going to use a polisher or anything, I'll just do this by hand. And that's really hard to get in the camera. You might just be able to see there. So that's polished up really nicely now. So I'm just going to take my time and go right the way down the length of this fretboard and get the rest of them to the same standard. Okay, so with the fretboard polished up nicely, I'm now going to do the same process on the rest of the neck. This will go quite quickly because it's, virtually all of the neck is a rounded surface, and that will polish up very fast. Okay, so there's the front and the back all nicely polished up, and I don't know if I'll be able to get, and the headstock is super shiny as well. So that's all good. Okay, so with that all polished up, we can start the assembly work now, and as we've got the neck on the bench, we might as well start with that. Okay, so with everything on the neck now, the next thing I need to address is getting the lacquer off these frets. It's done a great job. It's protected the frets from damage while I've been polishing the fretboard up, but it needs to go now. Sometimes you get this just right and it's kind of still soft enough to get off. That isn't the case on this occasion. It's hardened up quite a lot, so it's going to be difficult to scratch off. It's all right once you get a start. So what I'm going to do is I'll bring you in closer and I'll show you how I go about getting rid of this lacquer. Okay, so you might be able to see just by the difference in colour that that fret there still has kind of all the lacquer on, as does this one. But this one, I've cleaned it off. So what I'm going to do to get this lacquer off, obviously I need to be careful because I don't want to scratch the frets up. But the frets are kind of relatively hard. They're definitely harder than this bit of brass. So what I have is a piece of brass and the end is just a little bit hollowed out. So there's a concave end on the brass rod. So I'm just going to put a fret protector over so I don't damage the fingerboard. And this brass is nice and smooth, so I'm just going to run the edge over and it will flake the lacquer off without marking the fret. And once you've made a start, you can usually clean the rest of it off with your fingernail. And then I'll just give that a quick polish up once I've done them all, and we're good to go. Okay, so with the neck polished and assembled, we'll drop back onto the body and bring that towards completion. So the first job in assembly on this guitar is to fit the bridge, because we didn't have an opportunity to do it before. So what I've done is I've put some tape on just to protect the paint. I've marked in the centre line, and then I've taken the bridge and I've set the G tuner up so it's kind of, I'd say 3/4 of the way forward. So it's got plenty of backwards travel and a little bit of forwards travel. And then I've positioned this, measuring from the nut so that saddle is exactly at 34 inches, which is our scale length. What you'll find on guitars is your thinnest string, in this case the G string, is always going to be around about the scale length. So in this case 34 inches, and then the rest of your strings will generally kind of step backwards away from that. So if I set this up at 34 inches with a little bit of forward movement, I know I'm kind of in the ballpark for getting this set up. So with that done, I can now hold it in place and mark out where I want my screws. I'm just going to eyeball these. Like that. Now, it's not ideal drilling into a painted body, but we are where we are. If it does chip a little bit, the bridge will cover it. So, like I say, it's not what I'm shooting for, but it might happen. With that done, I'm just going to literally pop a little mark in with my awl. And these are my bridge screws. I'm just going to measure under the shaft in between the threads. And that's giving me about 2.5 mil. But what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to pilot it with a 2 mil drill bit first and then go in with the 2.5. And as always, I'm just going to go and get a little countersink and just clean the top of those holes up a bit. Okay, so now that this is in position correctly, the first thing we need to do with it is take it back off again, because obviously we need to install the ground wire that runs underneath it. But we can't do that until we're ready to put the rest of the controls and pickups, etc. into the guitar. Okay, so with the bridge off again, I'm going to start to install the pickguard and the electronics. And the first thing I'm going to do is just put these couple of little rubber pads onto the back of the pickup. So these are what provide the resistance when you tighten the pickups down. I'm not sure if you should stick them into the body or onto the back of the pickups. I'm choosing the back of the pickups. Next up, I'm going to feed the ground wire through to the bridge. Go through. I'm going to trim that down a little bit. And kind of get this roughly into place. So I can screw this little ground wire onto the shielding. A little bit fiddly at this stage. So I'm just going to start off with putting a couple of screws in the pickguard just to hold it in place while I'm assembling. Because there's a good chance I'm going to have to take it off again to access the truss rod nut when I'm setting it up. Okay, with that done, I'll just trim down this ground wire. There's a bit too much there. And just get the pickup covers in place. And now we can get the bridge back on. Some knobs on. And then some strap buttons. Okay, and now the bit that's been killing me for weeks now, I'm going to finally get rid of this horrible plastic off the pickguard. That's the ultimate new guitar moment, isn't it? And there we are. Actually starting to look like something now. Okay, with all that done, there's only one thing for it now, and that is to get some strings onto this so we can see how the initial setup falls. Okay, so that's it strung up. I've roughed the action in just by eye to get it somewhere near where I need it to be. So the next step is to have a look at the nut, and I can see just by looking that the action at the nut is too high. So what I'm going to do is bring you in close and we'll get those nut slots cut properly to depth. Now the issue I'm going to have is that my biggest nut file is about the right size for the thinnest string. It'll probably do for the next string up, but for the top two it's nowhere near as big as it needs to be. But I have got a tiny little round diamond file which I think will be good enough for the job. Okay, so the first thing I've done here is I've measured the gap underneath the first and second frets with feeler gauges. Then I've added 15 thou onto that stack. I'll get the string out of the way. I'm going to place that stack of feeler gauges against the nut. And just use my slotting file to take that material out till it makes contact with the feeler gauge. Put the string back in. Get it roughly to tune. Just going to measure under there. And we're about there. So then I'm just going to repeat that process on all the other strings. Okay, and that's the action at the nut sorted out. It's a lot lower now. Okay, so as you've just seen there, I very quickly set up the action. Wasn't far out at all, and set the intonation. Now, the G and D strings were pretty much spot on out of the box, and I just had to do a little bit of work on the A and E strings, but the intonation is really good now, so really happy with that. The neck relief is about right, so I'm not going to mess with that. I'm going to leave that to be. I fully expect this, once it gets into the warm, with string tension on, to possibly pull the neck forward a little bit, but with the issues we had with the neck, that's not an entirely bad thing. So I think this can be considered pretty much done now, so that only really leaves one thing to do, and that's for me to break out the amp and give it a quick demo. So I don't actually own a bass amp, which probably isn't that surprising because I'm not a bass player, so don't expect great things from this demonstration. So the closest thing I've got is my old Marshall. So this is a 1977 JMP 100, so I think that's a 2103 model. I've had this for absolute donkey's years. It was my workhorse when I used to play in bands. So we'll get this thing plugged in and we'll see what it sounds like through this amp. Remember, totally not a bass player. Okay, and there we have it, another project done. It's not been the easiest in the world. We've had some difficulties along the way, but I think it's come together really, really nicely at the end, and I'm happy with the results. I'm going to be back in a couple of days' time when we'll talk about what's coming up on the channel. Of course, we've got the Great Guitar build off, but I've also got a commission to build, and I'll be doing a series on that too. I hope you've enjoyed watching these videos as much as I've enjoyed making them. It's been a really fun series for me. If so, don't forget to give the videos a like. If you haven't already done so, subscribe to the channel. It does really make a great difference to me, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.